societal, and government upheaval, so you can stay ahead of the changes in our world and keep your family safe. Fortunately for us, we can recognize that we're at the precipice, a point in history where we can all see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's start the conversation, and welcome to the show.
And I do welcome you back. Wow, wild morning, trying to get everything up and running here. Been an incredible day so far out here in Asia, just for a minute still. Going to be coming back next week. But as we see, the airports, nothing happening in any of the airports out here. So if you are traveling, not a single restriction going on, no masks, nothing. They're asking you to do nothing. So what you're seeing back home just might be a nothing burger also in disguise here, what we're talking about. But as we see the gold panic, I'm going to call it a panic. There's no more gold being moved or delivered across the world. It's all being funneled into the United States right now. Even Switzerland cutting off all exports except to the United States. Australia doing the same. Anything that's coming out mining-wise that's destined in some of these refinery processing countries, a better way to term it, everything else is on hold for delivery to the rest of the world. Everything is funneling back to America. So they got caught with their pants down, hand in the cookie jar. They've sold that gold several times over, and whoever has it in hand is being forced literally at gunpoint to return the gold to somebody, even though they have it in their hand. It needs to wind back through that same paper trail that it was sold out and leased out. There is a million-man army looking for gold that has gone from paper and physical out to all these people through their castles, their winter homes, their whatever you call bourgeois second residences. It's on an airplane. It's also an airplane that had like solid gold 1,000 ounce bars as the hand rest on each of the seats in the airplane. This needs to be ripped out and then reaccounted for back in the London Bullion Exchange. And this is the level it's gone to. They're actually tearing gold out of individuals' airplanes that they thought they owned, but it was leased to them because it had been sold and rehypothecated and sold again and sold again. This is where we're living in. It's getting really precarious out there. The house of cards is so like, don't sneeze. That's how close we are to it. So Ransom, appreciate you joining me this morning. I know you got tons of stories to cover today. I'm right with you on the madness. The distraction for me is they're distracting you away from the crop losses that are coming in. We're looking at about a 20% global total of reduction in crops this year. So I think all the strangeness and all these scatter wave stories are all to distract you from the main number one thing we all need as humans is the food. I don't know if you agree with that. You've been watching the news, but I think behind it all, what they're pushing in front, so you look at that, what you don't look at behind is the crop losses globally.
Right. I had we all got the flu last week after we did the show. It was like literally after I got off the air, I started feeling like junk, and then our whole family is sick for a week. And it's funny because it's like I just jumped back right to the same place in the news as it was. Like I didn't even look at the news headlines really for 3 or 4 days. And then I get back on and I see this just like last week, but they're kind of more exaggerating. Walmart shoppers rage. They need a loan as bulk eggs now cost more than a tank of gas. You know what's funny? You could just skip eggs for like 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, literally, if you can't get cheap eggs where you're at, just skip it for 3 or 4 weeks. They'll be back at the normal price or at least affordable. But it's everywhere. It's the beef, the eggs. Beef prices are near record highs. What is going on? Well, there might be something.
They're slaughtering all the herds because they say avian flu's in the beef. That's why.
And then, my sci-fi side, my little sci-fi binging of ideas, movies, and news articles. And I always see these patterns. Like last week, we were talking about all the billionaires setting up these new tourist attractions under the sea. They're building under the sea tunnels everywhere. I forgot what the other one was called. It's like a hotel under the sea, like go down there and stay and have a party. And It's the new Atlantis idea. And then I see this article floating around everywhere about this 30 meters below the North Pole, an old nuclear U.S. Army base. I guess it's an Army base, maybe Air Force. I don't know. It's like 50 years old or something. But what they didn't really point out is how did it get under like 100 feet of snow and ice if our planet's been burning up, right? So it's completely buried with layers upon layers, and we're just talking the half a century worth of snow build up, ice build up on top of this thing. And then to blow your mind really out there, kind of links back what we were talking to last week also, is, you know, these genetic engineers and all the companies that want to bring back dead stuff. Sometimes they don't even have to clone it. This is supposedly a frozen worm comes back to life after 46,000 years. And this right here kind of, you know, if it's true, and that is indeed how old it is, it kind of proves that no matter what happens on the surface, you know, 50,000 years later, for sure, there's going to be life just popping up out of everywhere. No extinction, maybe extinction for the bigger animals like us and our livestock and stuff like that. But evidently life's just going to keep rolling no matter what we do. So we're like kind of irrelevant except for to ourselves. And they
Hey, Ransom, let me throw something quick. What if that's the excuse for bringing on a new DNA gene edited species, because they've been trying to get us to go to this insect protein with the worms and with the mealworms, etc. So what if that's actually a lab created one, but they couldn't bring it out, but they have to use the excuse of, oh, we found it in the permafrost? Is that too far-fetched for me to think like that?
No, it's not too far-fetched. It's not even too far-fetched to say, oops, it had a viral component that we didn't see, and then somebody got sick, and then they went home, and then, you know, I don't know, a new whole
Arctic worm flu, dude. They're just coming out of the woodwork.
Right? Or there's
termite flu's next, man, coming out of the woodwork. No pun intended.
Yeah, right. That's exactly what it's like. I mean, I'm going to say sci-fi story possibilities are really like unlimited. And while everybody's worried about classified things becoming public, I have a secret for you. Nothing is going to change your world as far as you living in it with any of the stuff that they're offering. It's all the distraction, and it actually seems like we're just heading, you know, face first into some pretty bad economic times and food problems like you were talking about. All across the board, you're just seeing, you know, economic problems. Here's one I thought you might find interesting. Another science fiction novel. This is just science fiction. I just want to make that clear. But it's supposed to be, you know, science fictioning through 25 to 28. Ironic, these numbers, they, you know, keep showing. So it looks like, I don't know what's going on, but something, it seems, is going to happen to the world between now and I'm going to say 2035 at the latest, that's world transforming. And the only thing that's going on in the background is the redistribution, the redistribution of the ownership of everything. So, like, here's another article about the economy here. All bets are off. Morgan Stanley warns selling panic triggers first $40 billion in CTA liquidations. Fraud on mass scale. Why Trump should appeal the real estate tax. That's great. It sounds great. All of this sounds great. But what they're not really looking at is, you know, stuff behind there. We're redefining words again. You know, like, so if you want to go to the store and buy something and you look on there and it says all natural, which doesn't mean anything. It literally, legally doesn't mean anything. It's just, you know, like a little propaganda ad on the package. And now we're going to redefine what healthy foods are. Not like we've, you know, our famous pyramid we've had for a long time that obviously wasn't that healthy and probably caused a lot of health problems, from dental decay to diabetes, all kinds of stuff, because we are an omnivore after all. And We're not really a grain-eating animal, although our entire civilization for the last 10,000 years has been based on the production of grain and grain-eating animals that we also eat. So, while we have to worry about really the world food supply, which is a real chance that the weather, I'm going to go ahead and say climate change, that's probably going to happen over the next several decades and a century, is going to be devastating to worldwide food population, because it's going to be so difficult to grow in certain areas. And it seems like those areas have already been considered lost areas. And I was looking at this diagram of genetics the other day, and I stumbled across how much, and I'm not going to name any names because I know people get offended and rules out there about stuff. But anyway, there's a large portion of the global population right now that is up to 70% inbred, meaning that they're already at the point in inbreeding. I don't know what the right word for it is. It's just kind of a cultural thing that developed from isolated pockets of villages. Not that there wasn't enough people to not have this a problem. It's just that people didn't travel, and their customs and other things kept them close to home. But what it means scientifically is certain populations that have recently been moving to Europe and other places had a real genetic emergency about to happen, where they were about to have, from 70 to 100% stillborns. And this has nothing to do with anything else except for the degradation of DNA. And they're having all kinds of, genetic-based health issues. And it seems like they move those people either A, to get rid of them, or B, to make sure that in the near future there's new admixtures to save certain populations from literally disappearing off the face of the earth in the next 100 years. And the reason I say that is because just from the genetic deformations alone, their populations were going to A, shrink, and B, have a considerably lower IQ, just resulting from that alone, and then C, sterility problems and other things like that. So it's something that the world didn't know about, but somebody somewhere did know about it early on, and it seems like that's part of the redistribution of populations. I think that there's been a lot more problems with human genes than the elite have let on. Everything from the poisoning of populations through forever chemicals, through the genetic manipulation through their foods and medicines, dirty water, other things. And then, for the first world countries or the Western world, there's already a fertility problem that's unidentified, the cause of. But then when you look at some of these remote populations, they were on the verge of extinction if they didn't get new admixture. In other words, if people didn't move in or move out to somewhere else, they were going to disappear, or at least have major societal problems due to low IQs. I mean, the retardation of genes and intellect because of social and behavioral trends that don't work out in the long run. I hope I said that without offending anyone.
None taken. I think that the Anunnaki, when they blend an original genome sequence, there might have been a shelf life on that, or that was given as a safety mechanism so those pocketed isolation areas could not continue to evolve indefinitely. Because you think about this for just a second here. So I'm going to, again, I don't want to offend anybody who is afraid to do any mind experiments here. But the original stories, translated from the Sumerian cuneiform text, as well as other remnants found in southern Africa, especially Zimbabwe, talk about a time 400,000 years ago when we Homo sapiens sapien was gene created as a species, as a worker class for this other race called the Anunnaki. Now just go with me for a second here. But they had blended our genome with an indigenous already species on the planet. But I think they put a default destruct mechanism in there, because if you were to break away from their control structure and you were able to form a fully functional, autonomous, let's say, equivalent of a country today, completely in itself for thousands and thousands of years, never to make contact with outside anything, at that point, you're already what you're talking about, and that would be a self-destruct mechanism, because they would have to bring in or go outside to find, new breeding stock, for a better term. And just think of us as animals or breeding stock. That was put in place because you got to think about, well, if these people break off and they're out there for 2,000 years on their own, damn, they're going to be very intelligent and they're going to come up with an incredible amount of inventions, especially if they are able to create without limitation, like we have been limited through our last easily 200 years of innovations that could break humanity free for free energy devices, different types of harmonic frequency mining techniques, and everything in between that we would need to do. Electroculture, there's like a million things, gravitational vortexing, and you could go with magnetization on I guess, frequency electrified plates to get higher seed yields, you get more yield out of the seeds, and magnetic motors, and we could have gone the whole gamut with that. But we got stuck going this blast it, break it, boom, put the copper above our heads kind of route. Now imagine if you didn't have to do that and you were a breakaway society that was able to continually evolve. And eventually in the future, if I was an Anunnaki like lab scientist, I'd be like, damn, they're pretty smart already. We got to dumb them down, so they just kind of follow orders. They're smart enough to continue to do stuff and think they're smart. But if they really have full intelligence, completely uncontrolled, without like a global layer on there to continue to repress these inventions of science, technology, thought, engineering, art, creativity, etc., they're going to go a million directions with that. They're going to finally reach our level once again. Now, we need to prevent that from happening. Let's put a default mechanism so if they do rope themselves off and they stay in a homogeneous, isolated population, eventually it will collapse because it will be exactly what you just described. Again, is it too far to make sense? Because I'll tell you another gene bottleneck going back in history here. Looking at supervolcanoes around the world, there is one called Lake Toba that's in Sumatra Island in Indonesia. That went off about 70,000 years ago, and it was a proper supervolcano. And apparently that bottleneck brought humanity down to less than 10 million humans on this planet, which means let's just even go 50-50 men, women. That's only 5 million possible combinations of breeding pairs. So we already got knocked down at least once during this ice age period, and who knows what happened really coming out of the last ice age, like the total global population, who knows what it was? I am sure it was far larger than we are told. Because most of those cities are 400 feet underwater. They would have been on the coastlines as well, predominantly squeezed around the equatorial belts. But I mean, they could have been in the billion plus population as well. We just don't know. But again, if that was, and after the Younger Dryas, and then we get the story of Noah and coming down to just a couple of breeding pairs again left over after some cataclysm. It happened at least twice. Younger Dryas and also Lake Toba. So it's happened twice in this ice age epoch of time that we have endured so far. And you got to figure the same thing happening into the last ice age and exiting out of the last ice age 2 ice ages ago. They would have experienced some traumatic, effect on the planet exiting out of the ice age 118,000 years ago. So I'm sure we have squeezed in, squeezed out, squeezed in, squeezed out. And I am curious if every so often we are visited once again to be reseeded, for a better term. And then maybe this is why we see quite a few different stories throughout antiquity of direct connection and interaction with what you would consider interstellar beings or hollow earth beings, either way. But again, that Lake Toba thing that brought us down to 10 million. So everything on this planet so far as a human that you understand came from that bottlenecking of 10 million humans at the Lake Toba event. because the rest of the even closer in history is way sketchier. So I think you can run with that point, Ransom. I know you could.
Well, even if we exclude extraterrestrial interjection, or, you know, other than the normal human groups interjection of genetics, those little groups that were bottlenecked were not the only humans on the planet. And especially with that date at 70,000 years ago, for some reason, Cro-Magnon decided to branch out all over the world and mix with everybody. It might not have been just an accidental, we came across them and they mixed. It more could have been some kind of necessity to interject new genes. They may have had no choice, because those other groups of humans were probably dwindled down to small populations as well. So you got Denisovan, you have at least 12 different ones. They haven't put names on these groups of different people. There's one in the Andaman Islands in between India and Indonesia, and the people have been living there. They're an admix of Cro-Magnon and some unidentified hominid, and they've just been doing their thing. But we know they're the genetic source for billions of people that live in the subcontinent of India now. And they mixed with European, or I guess Eurasian people, not really European people, but Eurasian people moved in, and they started this thing that was eventually became a caste system. And all around the world, we see the same thing. We see these caste systems, which in today's world are now resulting in genetic problems, because groups separated within themselves and wouldn't even intermarry or interbreed within their own groups due to social status or, religious reasons, or I don't like that village over there. But if you imagine back then, before all of those social constructs on people, and you had groups of people that needed to survive, you're not going to want to let your children mix with their cousins or their siblings. So it would have been a better choice even to come across other humans and swap DNA, swap some spit. We know that's the case because today we're a hybrid species of probably 15 plus different hominids. And then they invent social constructs that limit people to skin tone when that's actually irrelevant. Most of these different hominids had a whole range of skin tones, hair colors, phenotypes within their own groups. But in a world of 8 billion people, it's hard to believe there are probably billions of people that have genetic problems because they've been squeezed in and not allowed to move around, whether it was war or famine or just a social construct. We may find ourselves in that position in the near future where groups of humans are looking for other groups of humans just to survive. The problem is every time that seems to happen, humans seem to get in this spot where your little group of people just coming across another person could be an extinction level event for your people, because, people don't always have the best in mind for other groups. And, we talk a lot about in modern society, if things fell apart, the grid failed. I don't know. We had an EMP strong enough from the sun or from one of the technologically advanced countries to put us in the Stone Age, basically. And the same thing would happen then. Groups of people would group up, they would segregate themselves, and seeing new, different people would not only have the possibility of being a blessing for trade and growth, but it would also be a perceived danger, because those people could come in and wipe you out. And we know that in history, in lots of different histories, that exact thing happened, where a smaller, less technologically advanced civilization either was absorbed in some cases where that works out well genetically, or they were wiped out and disappeared completely. And now we're competing with not just humans, but groups of humans that believe they can design the future of evolution. So we have all these programs going on, and, talking about that worm there, imagine the amount of unknown.
Well, Ransom, could I interject first before you start on the worm? But what's one thing that's common amongst all times and all of these same people that you're referencing? What's the one thing that connects them all? I don't care through space and time, but what is one thing that they have unanimously agreed upon?
They like gold?
The reverence for gold. Yeah, something about that has been put in. And I don't care if it was 70,000 years ago or if it was younger dry as 15,000 years ago or if it was 8,000 years ago. There is something about this metal that has been revered for as long as we've ever, the first person to cast eyes on it. And again, I'll go a little maybe microaggression, large aggression on this one to those of you who are afraid to listen to new information. If you go back into some of the Indian Vedic texts, they talk about us as a species created 21 million years ago. So that'll blow your religion out of the water there in terms of how far this has been really back in history, how far it's been back in history. So if you want to go with the 21 million year old root, well, gold would have been revered then as well. But if we stay with more of the more quote unquote modern accounts of how we as a species were here, we evolved 400,000 years ago, and then some way we come back in, and then the reverence for gold as well with the Anunnaki and the southern mining operations in South Africa and Zimbabwe. That's even an off-planet species that reveres gold. So whatever it is that's kind of hardwired into us, that shiny rock there that's been in the that's always around in the rivers. It just captivates humanity. And you talk, people will kill for that rock. And that's the craziest thing. That's one thing that people will kill for, die for, fight for, intermarry for, create allegiances for, or just purchase now to hold on. And it still keeps your wealth intact. That's a crazy thing. 70,000 years of proven track record. And I'm done with my thought.
Your audio kind of keeps going up and down there, like the volume drops out. I don't know what that is.
That is my tweaking computer. I'll leave it as such here. I hope. How's the volume on that there? Better?
Yeah, it sounds good. It was just kind of going low while you were talking. Well, it's funny to me because, people are waiting for classified material to come out. And the truth is that we don't even know the story of how we got here in the present time. And some people somewhere, I think, have a better idea of it or a better history of it, but they hid that history away. And then, I'll just blow your mind here. This is the newest in scientific discovery. Large majority of homeless people in California, not illicit drug users, study finds. And then it goes in there to tell the exact opposite of the headline that says that heavy drug use is tied to homelessness. Isn't that just amazing that we finally figured that out? That, if there's illicit substances that destroy lives, that they end up homeless. But why haven't we been fighting the homeless scourge in the U.S. probably ever? We've never really tackled that or attempted to tackle that. And I think that's one of those programs that aids to the fact that the corporations and the governments of the world want to acquire every bit of property to where humans will own nothing and be happy. I know we're in a new era supposedly, and we're shining the light in the corners and we're doing all this, but in the background, smart cities are still being developed. Worldwide ID programs are still being pushed and developed. Digital currency is still being pushed as the future. And I was just showing a minute ago this one because I thought you would like this one here. The guy from the Bank of America here says Bank of America to launch USD pegged crypto stablecoin if lawmakers pass legislation. CEO says it's pretty clear there's going to be a stable coin, which is going to be a fully dollar backed. It's no different than a bank account. Now, that sounds great, kind of, unless the dollar falls, right? Then that stable coin is not stable at all if it's tied to the dollar. And then here's another article I was reading.
Oh, wait, and then it could be tied to your social credit score because those those digits can be turned off. You know, that's the whole thing about your bank account. They have to go through a few hoops and hurdles with the judge and sort of thing to get your bank account. But a single protocol controlled by a single bank that, you know, Bank of America is notorious for debanking those who had opposite opinions during the COVID time. Now you're going to let them in charge of a system that's totally tied into their blockchain, that they have the authority to actually turn the coins down to zero? No way. No way. That is a bait and switch. Danger, Will Robinson.
Right. And I was going to bring up this other article from Zero Hedge that basically talks about, in a way, it's the same thing you were talking about last week again, where we were talking about reducing values down to the smallest, you know, 10th or 100th or thousandths or millionths, so that there's pennies broke up into. Okay, so evidently over the last 50 years, the Federal Reserve Bank has been moving the gold back and forth between the Treasury and the Federal Reserve banks. But in the process, they take the bars and they mint coins, and then the coins never hit the public, and then they move back and forth. And somehow, over time, the amount of coins has been dropping in number, which means the overall amount of gold has been disappearing. But they did it exactly like that. They made it in little bitty increments to where it's untrackable for a period of time. And now they're going to go look for the gold. Well, it's been shipped out everywhere. And it kind of fits into what you were talking about. It seems like people are moving around like a cat, kind of covered up its poop, and send the gold back before everybody notices that millions of little chunks of gold have disappeared and no one knows where they're at. And they probably got reminted into new coins, so they don't even have the original minting from the US. It could say anything on it. So they've been stealing the gold. The question is do we go so far as to get sci-fi with the Anunnaki? Have they been paying rent? Is that what's been happening? Is that why the queen's or the king now, gold amount is a state secret, and they only let them know how much they want them to know, like whatever it is? And the same with the Fort Knox. There's supposed to have been this number of gold in there, and that hasn't changed. How come we haven't been increasing the tonnage of gold over time? You notice that too. They give you that same figure of how much gold we have over this big amount of time. Well, then how come we haven't been acquiring new amounts? Well, the answer is they've been stealing it. So the amount have been going down. Where it's going, nobody knows. It's like the biggest shell game ever. And meanwhile, you're worried about some list of names that's never going to come out. Nobody's ever going to be prosecuted. It'll just be like a 6 months ordeal where at the end of it, you'll learn nothing new. And I have a feeling that's the same for all of the subjects, the UFOs, the UAPs, the underwater submersible vehicles, the JFK, MLK, RFK, all of it. It's all just a big distraction. There's no reason that they would all of a sudden say, you know what? The new sheriff's in town. We're going to uncover everything and we're going to tell on ourselves. If that really happened, that would basically what happened today is the entire federal government and the new administration and everybody rooting for them just got embarrassed because we got the same thing as we always get. Nothing.
Yeah, I thought in that last comment you were talking, I thought you were going to talk about privatization of prisons and mental institutions with the homelessness crisis.
Stop scaring me.
What do you mean?
Almost all the prisons in the U.S. are already private. So
that's what I mean is, they're all private now. That's the whole thing. If anybody doesn't know this, they get paid to put people in prison. There's a corporation that gets paid as stock shareholders, as everything you understand on Wall Street. Some of those are listed in the S&P 500. Some of them are just Dow derivatives off of other larger corporations like Halliburton, et cetera. But you got to think that's a privatized prison corporation. Every time somebody gets sent to jail, somebody's got to pay for their food. The government pays to pay a company to bring the food to them. Somebody needs laundry for them. They got to have clothes. Well, then there'll be a contract issued by the government to the prison to a company that makes clothes for the prisoners. We used to handle that in the government in itself. That used to just be a government contract within itself to do that. Our own government that would make, say, clothes for the army soldiers then they transitioned into moving over and doing things for prisons. But now that's all private. So there's all private companies making everything for prisons, which is sickening, because the more people they put in, the more people they take off the streets, put them in mental institutions, the more money that's made by private companies. Why do you think everybody's landing up in jail these days? You think that's just a coincidence that we have the highest prison population? Yeah, because it's private. So the more people we put away, the more money that's made on Wall Street, which is ridiculous, babiculous. But let me do a gold quiz for you here. No. I used this chart in my video, earlier today. In the last 200 years, how much gold has been mined on the planet? In the last 200. Not all the previous gold from, way far back with kings and queens in the 13, 15, 1600s. That doesn't count. Just in the last 200 years, how much gold has been minted mined on the planet, and then could have been minted, but mined?
I don't know.
3,100 tons.
That doesn't sound like a lot. I mean,
it's not a lot, because you got to think about it. America has supposedly 5,800 tons. That's old gold. So put it in perspective here. I want to blow your mind on this one. China on the books, so they say, has 10,000 tons of gold. They have between 32 and 40,000 tons. So either they're mining and not putting out the figures and nobody knows, or there's a lot of old gold around that's been sloshing around from the Vatican and these different places that nobody knows about. Because you're telling me with a straight face, the mining records that we have and somebody did and crunched them all together, 3,100 tons in 200 years, and we're sitting on vast gold reserves like India, how many 10,000 tons, Brazil's got how many tons, thousands of tons, how many we got, Switzerland, are you kidding me? Like, how much tonnage out, how many thousands of years are we talking about gold production here that's now all consolidated into a very few hands again?
And
so if anybody got the question right, thanks. Maybe we'll get 1,000-ounce gold bar and we'll chip off and mint 10th-ounce pieces, and you'll never know. We'll just melt it down.
It's like that old, the golden rule, right? And if you really want to get weird with that, say, just, woo-woo, an Anunnaki shows up in a ship and says, where's the gold? We told you to, we were here just not too long ago. We told you to have the gold ready. If one country had more tonnage than another, who do you think gets the contract to be the new rulers? That's pretty obvious, right? But on the other hand, it could be just a group of people, and it's the same kind of like the diamond industry, where we know they were pulling up a lot of diamonds, but the bankers would lock all those diamonds up so that it would keep the value of the diamonds very high, because it's a supply and demand. You can't move them or sell them or do anything. And the more that they keep in vault, then everything new you pull out of the ground, then they just put a little more back into the vault, and it keeps the prices the way they want them to be, because he who has the gold makes the rules, right? I know that a lot of people know the other golden rule, to treat others how they treat you. But if you're a nation state hoarding gold, you treat the other country like they treat you, and that's steal the gold.
Yeah, I have a diamond and gold story for you when I was traveling in South Africa. But first, over onto Civilization Cycle, buy me a coffee. Thank you, BB, for buying us 3 double espressos. And H. Johnson again last week, throwing it down. Stephanie McLean, thank you, Matt, also for providing us with some double espresso so we can keep working through the night here. And I know you want to hear my diamond story. So I'm down in South Africa. This is 1994. Mandela just gets elected president. Apartheid had ended early 1990s. So remember, the technology I am talking about is well antiquated now. So if you're going, well, they don't do diamond mining like that anymore, dude. I'm going to take you back to the early 90s. So we're dropping back in time some 30 plus years here. In South Africa, there's 2 different areas you can go surfing. Like you can go up to Durban, which is way on the East Coast, or you can go on the West Coast, freezing cold water. Man, it is cold. And there's a place called Eland's Bay. eBay is what they call it, not the eBay shopping, but Eland's Bay. And it's huge. It was a huge lobster and still is a huge lobster, like natural area. Like it's incredible porous rock for like 50 miles, and all these lobsters tuck up in there. And it's the number one lobster production area, wild catch, because like it's the most perfect lobster hatchery you could imagine on Earth, man. So anyway, we're up there. They had a couple really good waves there. And as you go up into Botswana and Namibia on the beaches there, right at the border there too, if you go north of Eland's Bay, like maybe 40 miles or so, you come right to the border and there's barbed wire all up and down the beach. And I'm like, what? Is this like a camp or like an army? But no, this is the diamond mining area. You can't go in, bro. You go in there, they will literally shoot you on sight, or they will release the dogs on you and you will actually really get mauled, like nearly almost to death. And then you will be arrested and put into a prison for like 20 years. And I was like, what? What happens if you're surfing and just kind of drift over there? Like, bro, you can't. You really can't. You go across that line, even if you're in the water. I was like, well, there's no way you can get diamonds out of the water. Like, what are you talking about if you're surfing on the, they're like, come here, my friend. Your naivete even shocks me. And I was like, okay, well, what are you talking about? He goes, the diamonds are on the beaches. That's what you don't get. They come out of those pipes from the volcanic pipes, and they make their way down through erosion onto the beach. And they're actually sucked up by these underwater vacuums, for a better term. These things are pretty wide, and diamonds are invisible in seawater as they're totally wet. So they can't really see them, and it would take so long to actually find them if you went down as a one-on-one, that they had these giant, like the better things, the underwater vacuums that would pull up all the sand and everything, and it would bring it up on a conveyor through a hose, like an industrial pipe. And then they would just throw it out on drying conveyors. And then the diamonds would just magically come out of the grit, for a better term. But I did not know that diamonds were literally just laying all over the beaches, all over the beaches. And that was my diamond story from South Africa traveling. Stay out of Namibia's diamond areas. They really are very, very, and I mean it, pipe hitting, ridiculous, you disappear kind of. You're not going into De Beers area, and their private guards there are apparently ferocious and feared more than the military. That's how heavy hitting they were to keep people out of those areas. Like, those guys were no BS assessment. They're like, dude, you go there, you're not coming back. You understand that? I don't care if the current's going that way. You do whatever you can, because you land on that beach, you're gone. And I was like, I'm just a surfer, dude. You know, my surf. That's my diamond story, man. What do you think?
Well, it's a good thing you didn't, float up on the beach. So what are they doing? They just, or were they digging the sand and filtering the sand, or how were they getting it out of there?
Well, they have that giant, like, super high pressure. You know how when you see a lot of treasure hunters where they have that sort of pipe that sucks all the sand out and takes it, something like that, but a huge square. Not a little pipe, man. It was a big, huge square, industrial style. Just went up. They were vacuuming the ocean bottom.
Yeah.
And every layer they went to, there's more diamond, more diamond, more diamond, more diamond, more diamonds. There were diamonds everywhere across that area. But as soon as they come into South Africa, apparently there's that one area where they flow down to. That's one of the prized areas. So when you think they're mining diamonds, yeah, they could be. But a lot of it, there's so many diamonds. God, there's so many. They're not even common, or they're not even uncommon. They're common. That's why you get diamond, like sanding discs, and a lot of diamond, different kind of cutting tools in the industry, because diamonds are incredibly common. The ones that are super, could be like the 1 carat or half carat kind of stuff. You're right. They just throw those away to give you the perception that there is scarcity in those. But those are literally a dime a dozen. A dime a dozen for those. They're not rare at all. De Beers had manufactured this scarcity by, like you say, pulling all those back and putting them in a vault somewhere. I am sure if you found the amount of stored diamonds that are hidden from the public, it would be in the multiple tons, like hundreds of tons of gem quality, half carat to maybe 3/4 carat. Maybe it is even carat, a little bit over, but they didn't have like the clarity that they were looking for. But it's still giant gem quality diamonds. Tons and tons and tons are just sort of stored in sacks somewhere. They're not uncommon. They're super common. That's the whole thing. And I didn't know it until I had that first realization of it. So That's all I can say. I don't have anything more to add to the story.
That was a good story, though.
Thank you. Next, who's around the campfire? I'm gonna roast a marshmallow or listen to somebody else.
I don't know how much TV you've got to watch on your travels. Probably not much because you have better things to do. But the other night we started watching this Netflix show called 0 Hour, and it made me start thinking that if you remember all of last year, and I kept bringing it up, that you would get 5 probably or 6 to 10 mainstream news articles about the vulnerabilities of cyber attacks, right? And we would get that. They were just hitting us, especially during the Biden administration. Just the worry of Russians are going to cyber attack us. Rogue elements are going to cyber attack us. China's going to cyber attack us. And they just kept talking about that over and over and over and over again. And we kept bringing it up. And I was pointing out that I really felt like this was predictive programming for some future event. So I start watching this show, and I can immediately tell it was produced and created by the movie company that's owned by Obama, or at least he put money in it. So there's been a couple of movies out in a series that were made by them. There was, I think, How It Ends, with the big barge where they were telling you can't trust the white people. And then there was the next one, The Civil War. I watched that one. Lame. Really no plot. It seems like AI wrote both of those movies, kind of, with a little bit of political propaganda mixed in. Those same actors are in this new show. Like, I spotted out a bunch of them. And the premise of the show, it seems like they kind of smushed 2 characters, Biden and Trump, together. And it seems like because they had to have been filming prior to this year, so before 2025, that they thought Kamala was going to win. Now, the premise of the movie is somebody attacks the United States with a cyber attack, and it turns off everything. The trains, the planes, everything that works off an algorithm or AI or a computer system got shut off, and then they turned it back on so that everything would, crash, and planes were falling out of the sky and trains were crashing. Everybody's cell phone said this will happen again, right? So it's kind of a weird thing. But then you get into it, and the new president hires the ex-president that's having mental problems and memory problems and puts them ahead of this agency that suspends the Constitution. And then in the movie, and you could tell that this is a very kind of pro-leftist created movie, they put in there that, it doesn't matter if you find out who hacked us. We're going to blame Russia. We need to strike Russia. We need to cyber attack Russia. It doesn't matter who did it. And then it comes out that supposedly a leftist organization did it. So they have this ex-president in charge of a task force where they suspended the Constitution, and they're just locking people up willy-nilly with no trial, nothing. And the whole thing seems to be a predictive programming movie about what they thought was about to happen about right now. So I wouldn't even put it past them that something like that may happen. And the reason I say that is because I've noticed when the new administration took over, haven't seen one single article about cyber attacks or any of that. I'm sure they're out there. They're just not, right in my face at the normal news feeds. And it's funny because they were pushing several predicting programs. The idea that, oh yeah, in that other movie, This Is How It Ends, right? It was a cyber attack, but they didn't know who did it. And everything was shut down. So everybody ran to their bug out locations and all of that, but nobody knew who did it. So that's the second movie themed in that same way. But in this movie, they were showing it doesn't matter who did it. We're just going to attack the people we want to attack. And, that's kind of what you see behind the scenes right now. And I brought that up because a lot of people think that the risk of World War III is now over because there's an imminent peace deal and rare earth element deal with the Ukraine and Russia. And supposedly that's coming to an end. In the headlines, they show a good percentage of Gazans want to leave now, and they agree with Trump that it's uninhabitable, and they're believing that, you know, if you rebuild it, we'll come back, we'll live there, it'll all be peaceful, we'll all live together forever, it'll be great. However, they're still lining up for World War III. The EU nations I'm sure you saw the arrest of the guy that won the election over there in Romania. So all of the same stuff is still happening, but our news feeds here in the U.S. are crammed full of Musk and Trump and all the wonderful things they're doing for us, yet they're not panning out, because it seems like the administration may be different, but everybody that works for them is still the same people, and they're all on the same agenda. And if you rewind to last year, what was the agenda? Rising food prices, World War III. You know, I'm sure they're mad about their climate hoax coming to an end. Most of the data's out there. Most of the people are starting to slowly change what they're saying over to, well, you know, it's kind of cold actually now compared to all of the rest of the time on Earth. It's been dropping slowly for a long time. And I think they know that we are due for a worldwide event, and it doesn't matter. They don't even care. They're just planning for it. Whatever it is, dollar failure, World War III, super volcano, meteorite impact, it doesn't matter. AI takeover. You can pick that one and throw that in with the cyber attacks. Whatever it is, it's going to happen in the next 10 years. And the predictive programming, all of the people that push these ideas. And I thought it was really funny, too. In that movie, you can really tell who makes it because, you know, like Wolf Blitzer and those guys over at CNN are in a lot of movies doing cameos. But in this movie, they had every network, Fox, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and all of the usual talking heads you see on TV all took part in that movie to give you this idea that just around the corner, there's going to be an invisible boogeyman that cripples the United States. And I noticed these movies aren't being made about Europe or China or Russia having, you know, just something. It's always the United States.
It's the last bastion, dude. Yeah, I was thinking, you know, when you were talking right there about, so all the shock and awe campaign coming in and, you know, disrupting and undoing what has been done for the last 12 to 16 years in terms of policies and things. So imagine, you know, after 4 years, everything is kind of unraveled and kind of smoothed out. And then for some reason, if the political party on the Republican side was completely removed, then the sweeping change that would come in, imagine the shock and awe of leftist policies coming in that fast. And like, you got to go to a camp right now. Like, you know, they're rounding people up today because of this. They were parts of the ones from the last administration. They were like the shock and awe would be pretty ferocious then too, if it were to flip the switch and the pendulum were to swing in their ridiculousness. And it always is United States, because we're the last ones with weapons. We're the last people who can hold guns. We're the last thing that stops the rest of the world from falling. I mean, to a point. But as long as we can continue to have it here and you know, at least be some sort of, well, I would have said prior, some sort of bastion for free speech and freedom of speech, but I don't really believe that any longer. But, you know, there's something there that still sort of gives the world like a, you know, a little foothold to hold on to, that it's not completely all going North Korean style. Although Europe is getting very close, I would believe, you know, Korea, most of Europe's going full communist as we speak. I mean, the unelected oligarchy over there that's moving toward, you know, all these what were prior, what you consider in communist manifesto type of programs and the playbook for it directly. Absolutely the same. And if you're liking this conversation, please remember to go over to civilizationcycle.com and throw your email in there. We'll get you the show notes for tonight's show. I sent those out just prior to the show tonight. 7 different bullet points, what we spoke about last week. It's conversation starters. It's things that you can remember so you can go do more research on your own. Because right now it's very pivotal. It's very important for us to have the conversations, but to share the ideas on what's coming next. So for me, I am so adamant about seeds this year. For my last, as long as I've done this radio program and my channels, YouTube channel, video production, There's never been a time that I think it's more important to grow food, because the research I've done, 20% losses globally on the grain crops this year. I'm talking all of it. We're going to, if it pans out the way the projections are, we're looking at a 20% global reduction in corn, wheat, barley, sorghum, oats. We'll talk more about this when we come back. But remember, civilizationcycle.com. Head on over there. Put your email in and we'll get you the show notes. And that way you can also, we talk about a lot of things here, so you can remember what we talked about in the show. We'll be right back after this short break. Ransom.
Listen to Revolution at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
There are few things you can count on in a major disaster. Having your water supply cut off is one of them. With the Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank, you'll have months of drinking water in your home. Everyone else will stand in line waiting to get just a few bottles. It's one of the easiest, most affordable ways to store emergency water, and it takes up hardly any space. The Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank includes 1 BPA-free liner, comes with a siphon pump for extracting water, provides easy-to-follow instructions, fits just about any bathtub, large or small, fills quickly in 30 minutes or less, holds up to 65 gallons of water, and keeps water fresh for up to 16 weeks, holds about 2 months of water for one person. A person can generally survive without water for about 3 days. However, the exact amount of time depends on many factors, including age, activity level, and overall health. Don't gamble with your life and well-being. Being prepared is easier than ever with Civilization Cycle and Alexa Pure.
Our Grid Doctor 3300 has been upgraded to include EMP Intercept technology. Our built-in Grid Doctor technology incorporates industrial-grade components to safely protect the Grid Doctor 3300 and keep it operating in those dangerous times. EMP Intercept technology has been designed to exceed U.S. military requirements for a high-altitude nuclear detonation that results in an electrical magnetic pulse. This protection also covers lightning strikes, grid surges, coronal mass ejections, solar flares, and phases E1, E2, and E3 of an electromagnetic pulse. Lightning strikes,
New York City in the early morning, after a night of no electric power, and so no lights, elevators, subway trains, or any trains, airports, air conditioning, traffic signals, television. What it did have in the dark streets was a wild outburst of crime. Arson, looting, mugging, and 1,000-fold fire alarm.
Never get left out in the cold. There is never a reason to ever let you or your family suffer. Instafire and Civilization Cycle are on a mission to make fire starting and off-grid living easy for everyone. You shouldn't have to be a mountain man to strike a flame and make a fire anytime, anywhere.
Economy, food and population, it's all shifting right now. It is. It's just a cycle. We're going through a cycle. And again, you know what Ransom and I were talking about in the first hour, who knew these cycles were returning with the intensity and with the amplification of that intensity? Like, to know a cycle's starting, that's great. But when will it get really intense enough where it will disrupt the status quo? And I think that's what a lot of these secret schools of knowledge and a lot of these incredibly wealthy people understand far better than those of us in the rest of the world here. Although we do our best to try to understand cycles and understand, you know, some more workings of the cosmos, a lot more stellar knowledge than most people on the planet, I'm going to say, you know, understanding ancient history and, you know, stars and how energies move through. I think we know a little more than a decent percent of the population on the planet. But again, that whole mystery school would be a 10x of what ourselves know. You know, there's niches within that, and there's knowledge passed within there that's hidden from most of the general public, especially the vibration frequency, how you can utilize frequencies or vibrations to create space around. I'm not talking like ceremony type of thing, but in terms of you manifesting something in a certain resonance frequency, or like getting your space harmonious, as they say. You know, there's a lot of these things that just the average person in the world doesn't understand, won't consider, or has never been taught or ever even seen before. But that's where these people live that have billions of dollars. That's where they live, in that little ecosystem of secret knowledge. So as the world's shifting right now, please understand this shift is on purpose. From the events that you're seeing play out at this current time, that's being ridden upon a natural cycle. So whatever these moneyed people of the world, kings, and you go take some of these aristocracy back several thousand years, these same characters. Now they started their central banking, and they've moved on since just being just outright czars and kings or emperors, you know, and that kind of control of society. They branched out. Now they got central banking. They are riding on top of this natural cycle that is here. It's not inbound anymore. That's what I was originally talking about on my channel, was it's coming, and you'll know when it's here, when we suddenly get this different control system put in place, and you're going to see a lot of population migration. You'll know it's starting. And sure enough, right away, we see this massive population migration movement across the planet really started in earnest around 2020. And the way the economy is now shifting in earnest, really 2025, it's definitely just on a roller coaster bend here. So what's next? The crop losses. So we've checked two of the boxes so far of the absolute biggest things to look for in our civilization and our world moving forward. So here we are. Food's next. So I'm just going to throw it out here, Ransom, to start the second hour. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here on Civilization Cycle. And if you like this content, again, buy me a coffee or support our sponsors there. You saw the advertisements, especially the Instafire. Love that one. Fire up the plasma torch and get your thing on the go. Seeds is going to be another huge one. We didn't run any seeds tonight, but trueleafmarket.com, links in the description below. We are looking at about, I would say on an average, we're going to lose about 20% of all the grain crops this year on the planet. Now, that's going to be different percentages, and so not everybody eats rice. Please understand that. But the entire rice crop this year is looking at a good 15% reduction, possibly 17%. But wheat, on the other hand, there's going to be far larger wheat reductions into the 30% range. And if you come down into the barley and the oats, those are massively up into the 30-40% reduction range. But then if you come back down to something like sorghum, it's only going to lose maybe 5 to 10%. So as an overall statistic, if you're going to run across all the grains and smash and sandwich them together, we're looking at probably about, I would say, a good 20% reduction. So will you change your diet because of that? Because you can find a cheaper staple food? And when I say that, I'm talking about grain pricing at the wholesaler or off the futures exchanges. You know, you can take delivery. If you're in Chicago, you can take delivery of, I don't know, 100,000 tons of wheat if you want to, if you got it on contract. But then that wheat goes somewhere. It goes on a rail, it goes on a barge, it heads somewhere. And from that point, then you start adding pennies every time it moves into a factory, every time it's handled again, a few more pennies, a few more pennies. I'm talking about a full 20% reduction globally of all grains this year. That is not being talked about in addition to all this craziness we're seeing with the revamping of the global economy. So, this is how I wanted to start the second hour. We can take it any way you want. Ransom, I'm going to pull up a couple charts here myself. Let me see what I can do and get you some numbers here. But thank you, everybody, for supporting us here, and also continue to support Revolution Radio so we can stay on air. We're at revolution.radio right now. Jump on over. Support tabs right at the top. Different ways to support. You can do crypto. You can do check. There's an enormous amount of ways for you to support the station here, so we can keep broadcasting just like this. But Ransom, I saw you had an FAO article up there. Please continue with that while I try to find my slide.
Yeah, I was going to point out that, a minute ago I was talking about the cyber attack news just kind of stopped, right? So I went on a Google search for, food production for the world, and I noticed there's not much updated articles about this topic. Now in 2024, you can find a bunch of articles just like this one from the World Food Program USA. And keep in mind, there was a lot of waste and fraud that we're uncovering where money went to these programs, but it never actually became food for people to eat. And, that has nothing to do with this, but is there a global food shortage? What's causing the hunger, famine, and rising food costs around the world? I think Dubai explains that quite nicely on a daily almost, right? But I wanted to show you where we're going now. If I could find the article that I had there. Not to mention, it's almost science fiction. They say the shape of the inner core is changing. That was just a stall tactic by me till I find the articles. And then you got this. And I was wondering if that's directly related, do you think? I would think so. One of them's the Earth magnetic North Pole is on the move, and scientists just updated the position. This is actually an article you sent me last week. And then this one's this week. It's almost science fiction. Scientists say the shape of the Earth's inner core is changing. What does that mean for us? Well, in layman's terms, I think that means earthquake, volcano. Why is it changing, though? Is that directly related to the sun's cycle? How often does this happen? And I know it gets into this idea that people talk about the Earth bowing or tipping. Some extreme people say it flips all the way, but I don't think it flips all the way. But bowing or tipping, in other words, moving on its axis a little bit, we kind of know that this happened. And the way we know this happened is if you look at the oldest, or at least arguably oldest structures on Earth, like Teotihuacan, for an example, or even what's the one further down in the Yucatan, Chichen Itza, or you can go further down to Cusco, or even what's the one right next to Pumapunku? I forgot the name of it, but irrelevant than that. All of them are tilted about 3 degrees. Now, this could come from two things. Either the Earth literally tipped or bowed, and I've seen some projections where this would only last maybe 100 to 200 years at a time. So it is very possible that archaic man didn't write about it because they were too busy, coming back from whatever disaster happened, if this happened. So they wouldn't have had time to work on their artistry of the celestial skies. So by the time people started discovering the old artwork, things were back to normal in the sky. Now, I always thought that there should be some kind of reference that the Earth actually had a tilt on its axis different than it is now. And I would argue that those cities that are orientated just a little bit off north, not the north of today, but those cities seem to have been pointing to the Earth being tilted. Now, the other option is there's been a discovery in China near the pyramids recently where they discovered that the builders of those pyramids were using magnets to align true north. So They could have been using magnets at a time where the magnetic pole was not where it was supposed to be. Not the physical location of the North Pole, but the magnetic pole. So they, orientated to the magnetics at the time. So you got two of those ideas going on at the same time. And for some reason, I lost these. Oh, here it is. All right. So, like I was saying, all around the world, we're talking about, war and resets and blah, blah, blah. But the major tech companies and the oligarchs and the powers that be, the elite, are all still banking on this idea of smart AI-run cities from the Middle East to Asia and then eventually into our portion of the Western world. Rich in cash, Japan automaker Toyota builds a city to test the futuristic mobility. And, they already have stuff in China and Japan and different places where they got really cool technology being implemented. So we get to look at what it could be like, and that might be coming to the United States. Orlando could start to resemble the Jetsons with flying cars from the airport site as soon as 2028. You add that to all the drone delivery that is now taking place, which moves into the plane crashes and other stuff that are happening, which seems to insinuate that inevitably we're about to have to go over to an AI-run air traffic controller system that monitors everything in the sky, everything on the ground, and especially if the things on the ground could go airborne. I'm sure everybody's seen that new video of the hover car that just leaps over the cars and flies. It's AI, and it's wind-powered, basically. It just lifts up and moves. But this is what you'll have in the in-between. So when they build these new smart cities or these conglomerations of populations to get away from the strife, the poverty, and other things, where people with a little more resources could use their digital IDs and their cryptocurrencies to buy the products in the stores, and everything's all digital. In between, just like on what was that movie with Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes where they were stealing the Taco Bell to eat, Demolition Man. The real thing's happening right now. We're back in the days of train robberies. So in these big stretches between cities, people are literally climbing aboard the trains, disconnecting the cars, and stealing all the cargo. Now, right now, it's Nikes, TVs, trinkets, because that's still the way people think. Now, move forward a little bit to where we're having a worldwide food shortage, and they'll be cutting off these trains and different stuff to get a whole cargo load of rice or barley or wheat or, whatever it is, or even supplies for the Taco Bells, just like the movie. Either way, you can see that this could move real quickly into food heists instead of trinket heists. And then I wanted to show you this last article here. Not that one. There it is. Arizona plane collision raises questions about air traffic controller towers. And if you go to drudge.com right now, they have Elon Musk push for retired air traffic controllers to come back because there's such an emergency. Well, most of those people are elderly. And then we move into the problem of what do we do when the majority of the population is now having severe health problems, strokes, heart attacks, embolisms, blood clots. All of these things are common things that happen to some people when they get older. However, they seem to be an uptick in them in our time. And then, to circle back around these large portions of the world that have inbreeding issues with their genetic populations. And you can see that all at once around the world, along with the infertility and things like that, that there's going to be a drop in food and a drop in production of humans and a mass die-off. And I've been talking about this for years, but it's inevitable that the older populations of the Western world are all going to get sick and have problems right about the same time.
Yeah, I sent you a GIF that I came across this morning. That's so incredible that you were talking about equatorial changes. Go to your personal one over there on Skype and check it out. And I also sent you the grains forecast. So I was trying to dig in. Again, some of the information that was findable last year is not findable this year. So I don't know if they're scrubbing the internet or not allowing or updating anything but it's quite amazing what you cannot find this year. You cannot find it. So you think there would have been a lot of Q1, and they had some preliminaries for Q4 of 2024 for crop production, planting, etc. So you know how the USDA, government agency, and European Grains Council, and all these different things from, different nations, and CONAB down in Brazil, they're top notch for South America. South Africa is kind of hit or miss depending on who's really doing the analysis. Mainly it's USDA down there. They're clunky, they're slow, they're months behind, and they really need to update how they do grain forecasting. So USDA, this is for you. Because being in this country, I want better grain forecasts on the fly, and we all as humans on this planet need a better way to really understand what's coming at us. And you guys are using 1950s technology of waiting to get out there on the fields and looking at it and instead of smashing numbers together using AI. So what I did over this, Saturday was I had AI run through the news with my quantifier of give me the 20 countries that are showing in their news 20% crop losses or more, name the crop, and then tell me the news agency that gave you that story. So Grok went and did its thing. And I started with wheat first, and I was able to run through a bunch, and I had to back test and tweak because I had some of my own numbers from previous maps, and I knew where a lot of these regions were anyway. So I did some more granular data stuff, which is not this chart, but then I asked it to break out like, okay, in Pakistan, tell me these areas that are growing sorghum. I already knew the Punjab was a hugely, gigantic growing area. Mainly Punjab is one of the #1 areas for production. I think it produces like 60% of all the veg and grain and everything coming out in Sindh. Those two provinces together there, I already knew those anyway. Massive losses through the years there. So when it said, 20% loss in Sindh, well, I was like, I already know where that is. So I went to go to the grain maps and look myself. That was for sorghum. But then I started plugging away at wheat here, and I was asking it, in the beginning, just in a general sense, just tell me which part of the country it's in. So that's how I was working. I was working backwards on it. Like, just tell me where the losses were. Because if you can give me the region, I kind of been doing maps for 10 years of these grain areas. Kind of got all the bookmarks and stuff. I can jump you into the grain growing maps in like seconds. They're all bookmarked on my computer already of all those years of research. So I already kind of had an idea. So I'm like, tell me where the grain crops are lost on wheat specifically, which region, which country, what was the percentage, and what was the news article. In case I want to backtrack it, I could just jump over to Bloomberg and put Indian wheat, Northwest region, 10 to 15% loss, Bloomberg, and that will pop me up a bunch of articles. I don't need them to give me links for it. You can do your own research on that. So anyway, look at the numbers that they're showing. This is for wheat. So the estimated total country loss percentage. Now ask it to skip Ukraine, because that's already a known given that they're going to have almost zero of anything coming out. They're barely hopping along. I would say 5% max of their total, whatever they were doing prior. They used to export almost 30 million tons of grain, but that's all to zero. So you can already get that calculation. That's a zero. And then Grok tried to keep throwing in these things like, normal typhoon damage. Well, this place normally gets damaged by typhoon. And I'm like, skip all the typhoon damage, skip all the normal things that happen every year in terms of weather events, cyclones, typhoons, etc. So what it gave me here was this list, and then in another couple lists I generated, a few of it was like mega drought, another was like windstorms, another one was a certain kind of pest that had rolled through the crops, So I kept doing all these different kind of formulations with it, and granular and more wide. So I wanted to take it to a wide scope and bring it down, smaller. But this is what we got just for the wheat. At least I did, and then I was chatting with a couple people trying to give me some direction on which way to go with the forecasting on it. So to put this in perspective, I'm a dude that's not employed, although I work as a grain consultant occasionally, but not employed by the government in a full-time position. And I am running down in real time using AI where our crop losses are in the world and estimates of what our grain reductions will be for wheat months ahead of the USDA. That's embarrassing for the USDA. I'm putting this list out here. I'm going to be writing them over Monday and go, you guys are so clunky, so ridiculous. I cannot believe that you're doing grain forecasting the old way of waiting until you actually see somebody plant in the fields, or you actually get an eye on the ground assessment. And then how long does it take you to go to all these regions in each country and get assessments and have your surveyors out there and your crop tours? And like, damn, they are super dinosaur old with their technology. Shame on them for being so backward ass. And here I am sitting at a desk and can run down the grain forecast probably with more preciseness than the USDA by using AI, simply asking me, point out the news articles that are showing me the losses right now. Now, understand in North America, we haven't gone into the planting season yet, but based on last year's planting, the losses, the cold, the wet, and the delays in planting, because you got to have soil at a certain temperature before you can plant in. And if it's too wet, they're not planting in mud, right? So all these things, those are other parameters. Like, tell me where the biggest floods were on top of the crop fields and like the main grain growing areas of the United States, and tell me where they had absurd floods, extreme snowfalls, and this kind of thing, right? So you're getting a little weather detail in on top of the actual layers. So then you already know that area, huge central area, probably like 25 or 30% of our planting area is not going to be planted on time this year, right? So you can kind of run this out in a million different directions if you had the time using AI. Like, it can answer every question. It's just how ingenious are you to get it to prompt and script it to give you the info you want. So that's your wheat forecast right there. That's your wheat forecast. Because some areas, like in India, it's warm enough to be growing right now. Just in the United States and Russia, we are not. But Russia, based on last year's yields moving forward in the same areas like the Volga region for the oats, some of these conflict areas, you're going to get the same sort of reductions. So they have to boost yield in the rest of the country an extra 20% to make up for the losses along the border areas. That ain't happening. So you can kind of stick them in a certain, they might raise it 5%, but you can sort of squeeze them in the same box of productions based on conflict zones where they grow wheat, at least in those areas in Russia right now. So there's your rundown. Take it for what it's worth. This is a statistical model and probabilities. So again, it's going to require refining monthly as we go through this, because some of those numbers obviously are going to adjust. But getting a yearly forecast in advance of the USDA by a full month or so before they come out with their Q1, like, seriously, they should have this 16 ways from Sunday with like 50 different pages of ways they've twisted the information. Because if I can find like flood information on crops, knowing that the average delay is 6 weeks based on prior floods in the same areas, and Dan, this AI can run all that for you. You don't even need to look at a single news article except on your back testing to make sure they gave you the right information. Like, it's embarrassing how behind and far behind our like government institutions are. And that's not just America centric. It is pretty much everywhere. And if you think our FDIC system's better, no. If you think the SWIFT system, damn, that's from the 1950s. I'm out here in Asia and seeing 10 different pay-through technologies, all tap to pay, 10 different platforms. And we're still back home using cards where you need to swipe it. And then people can swipe your information after you swipe that card. Walmart. So we're still in a stone age of payment technologies as well. So anyway, thanks for letting me ramble, but I did like that spinning globe that you were showing, by the way, is a GIF of that perturbation that Ransom was talking about. It's weird that I come up to something with the same that he would, and we didn't even talk about this earlier in the show. I was just surfing through the news and saw this one, and it was incredibly interesting how, look at that, Antarctica right on the equator. South America straight on the equator, but north-south. And then it's interesting how it shifts back into what we understand the present day. Now, how fast would that shift occur? Because Ransom, you're talking, what if it's 200-year increments on that, or 400-year increments? Would that not explain a lot of the mud floods, and would that not explain a lot of the lost time that we have in our human history? I mean, maybe it's a small incrementalism of that, and eventually it twists and comes to the full, and then it comes all the way back. I'm not sure. I don't know if it happens all at once over a 1,000-year period or whatever.
The thing
better than me.
I was reading about that exact thing, and they were proposing that the entire event would last 200 years. So maybe 200 years to go down, 200 years to go back. And I've always had a problem with these theories because of the precession of the equinox and the fact that man has been keeping track of the sky for so long, and there's no real references to the stars changing, except for, like I said, there's these anomalies in these ancient building structures. Now, there's a big argument on how old they are, like some of these, but we do know that Teotihuacan was the first city in the New World, at least older. Even mainstream archaeologists agree. They don't know who the people that lived there were, so they're just calling them Teotihuacanos, just a blanket term. But this is at least 100 years before the Mayans laid the first stone on any of their stuff. And I would put to you that the Mayans actually found places like Chichen Itza, and that's why they built their city around it. And the reason I say that is because I've been there. I got to inspect it. And what you find there is a massive calendar that represents the stages of human development. Everything about it is a clock that's tied to humans. So it does everything from keep track of factoids about the human species all the way to when to plant, where to plant, and stuff like that. It's a big calendar. And what's funny is they don't even study the shadows of these things. They only study the actual mathematics of the monument. But when you go there, you'll see that there's this pyramid that someone put fine cut stone on. And I mean flat, perfectly cut stuff. And there's really no argument that the Mayan style of building is really rough cut stones with volcanic mortar. So they make mortar and all of the stones. So if you go to places like Tulum, and there's no argument that that is a completely Mayan site, there is nothing that has, right angles, perfect cuts, none of that. But you find that at Chichen Itza, and you find that at Teotihuacan and different places. A lot of people don't know that they see those big pyramids and everything. A lot of people don't know that wasn't even uncovered until the 1900s. In other words, when the Aztecs found it and the Mayans found it, it was completely covered with soil and debris. We know that there was some sort of element-based technology because they have a bunch of mica there, a bunch of mercury there, some kind of major explosion on the main street. But even more bizarre than that, when you go to the Temple of Quetzalcoatl there, the part that the public doesn't get to see is if you go behind the pyramid, there's a bunch of these Puma Punka-like right-angled, fine-cut, hard stones, just like rubble laying around everywhere. And whoever came and built the top layer of that pyramid, they just ignored that stuff because they couldn't move it. So it's just sitting there. So you find that same thing everywhere, this really high-tech, fine-cut stone, and then what we know of as civilizations today come up on it. And this is from the Romans to the Incans, everywhere. The same thing happens. People come up on it, they go, wow, then they build their temple on top of it. Then another civilization comes, they build their temple on top of that temple. But we know that there were these cities that are much older than anything recorded in Mesoamerican history. So Teotihuacan, for example, is for sure the first city before the Mayans were building anything, long before the Aztecs got there. Maybe the Olmec made it, the ancestors of the Mayans, but nobody knows. There was no references, no writing, nothing. Just this weird, out-of-place, fine-cut stone, and then pyramids built on pyramids. So the Sun Pyramid there actually has 5 inner pyramids, and you find the same thing in China. Like the Emperor's Pyramid. If you go under it, there's more pyramids that were built at earlier and earlier times. And they just keep building on top of it. And we're not talking about like recent stuff, like when the Catholic Church comes and they build their church on a site. They've been doing this over and over and over again for thousands of years. The question is what have they been covering up? It seems like literally each time is a covering up of what was there. Like any proof or any indication of, archaic humans, not all the way back to like different hominids, but archaic as far as in prehistory. It's just cover up after cover up. Even in the Middle East, you have the Romans show up. They build on top of the Phoenician cities. The Phoenicians were building on top of some older, unknown civilization. You know, the giant blocks, some of them that aren't even moved from the quarry. They're just still sitting there. There's nobody in human history from the time that they stopped working on that till now that knows how, why, or anything about it. How or why did they do that? They don't know at all how. We can't do it. And as far as I know, the Romans couldn't do it. That's why they chopped up little blocks of old stuff and they built their new temples on top of it. But they couldn't build what was there. And you find the same thing in Jerusalem, giant stones. And then you have the stories of the different tribes that moved there, the Hyksos, which became probably the Hebrew. And then they built their temple on top of that. And then other people came, they destroyed it. They built their temple all the way to today when we got the Dome on the Rock sitting there on top of it. So the question is what is it that some group, and this is what throws you in woo-woo land, what entity or group of entities, human or other, has had the ability to keep track of history, the stars going back, I'm going to say 100,000 years, because I've always said we have this precession of the equinox. Nobody wants to admit that it's more than 26,000 years. But logically, if it was 26,000 years, you would have had to seen it twice to know that it's a pattern. So that pushes it back to 52,000 years. And then a third time to verify, which would be 78,000 years. And that pushes that back past that point in which you were talking about, where the mitochondrial DNA of the core species of humans shows that there was a severe bottleneck right then. So something happened worldwide. And this is long before the 12,800 recent reset of everything. So you can only imagine what's under the ground, for one. And two, if you go to those places like Göbekli Tepe and all of those places, they indicate that they had metallurgy going on. In other words, they already knew how to get gold out of the environment. They already knew how to get silver and other stuff. And then you got stuff like in Africa, you brought this up earlier. They have these little statues there of different tribes. And there's this very famous artifact that has a bubble in it. And inside that bubble was a piece of chromium that we barely found out how to make that alloy recently. And it's like a out of place, out of time, proof of technology by a Stone Age culture that thought it was so important that they encapsulated it inside of one of their religious artifacts. Just real bizarre stuff. I don't know how I...
Yeah, a lot of out-of-time historical artifacts these days. Bring me the chromium, man. Bring in the chromium. Taco Banana, Jeff in Nebraska, thank you so much. Bought us 3 double espressos. You guys are awesome. I'm getting my gold and farm supplies ready. Stock up on the lead too, my friend. And again, what else, would you add to that list of must-have essentials? Food, well, water filter, some kind of water filtration, Ransom, what would you go? Food, water, gold, obviously going to need some tradable, silver to stack in there too. And actually, copper rounds might be a thing because we're at the end of copper right now too. And, you were talking way back in the first hour about the climate madness sort of shifting away. Yeah, the amount of copper they needed to facilitate and build all these green devices in the next 20 years, they needed more copper than we mined in the last 2,000 years combined total. We needed to double that amount in the next, 20 years to try to have just enough basic copper for all these windmills and whatnot. But think about going down to a trimetallic system. If you had a minted copper coin, because they come in 1 ounce rounds, you can find these anywhere that gold and silver, you can buy a 1 ounce round online. You can buy a 1 ounce gold, quarter ounce gold, any of these sites like JM Bullion is a good one. Money Metals, there's several of them there. Noble Gold has some stuff too that you can get off the fly. Anything that you have, you can find these copper rounds. So I'm wondering, in the future, if we're going to go to start using again, because gold and silver always hold value thousands of years. It's not going to change because we're in America and our currency's not. That argument never makes sense to me. Well, they'll never use that because it's American dollar. Come on, man, have some realism. But gold, silver, now would you think if you couldn't afford silver, would a minted pressed copper round have value? Do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, almost all you could basically boil everything down to not only your question about what should you be preparing for in the cycles to come. It goes back to ancient times. It's just simply the elements, right? Earth, wind, water, fire. Think about that. What do you need? What do we have to invest in this year? A lot of people have to buy soil, right? So there's your earth. You're going to have clean air, clean space to even grow stuff. And then you're going to have those other things, the fire. You have to have fire. So it doesn't matter what happens. We're boiled down to those alchemy things, right? Right? The four elements.
We need ether too. You forgot the ether.
Well, yeah, if you count that, I guess that's kind of a untangible thing.
I do count that.
But
it used to be more elements, actually.
The four that are tangible is what I mean. And you never wonder this. That also itself seems like a boil down from a technological civilization. Think about all of the alchemy people, and they had those ideas, whether it's in Asia or the Americas or Europe. Everybody in ancient times was tripping on this idea of earth, wind, water, and fire, right? But the fire and the other things, if you really look about it, they knew the four states of matter. Wind is gas, water is liquid, earth is solid, and fire is plasma. Those are the four states of matter in the scientific world, right? Those are the only four states that we know of, except for maybe that mental state of the ether or the, I talked to my son a lot about this. Where is that place where we get ideas from? In other words, a long time ago, there was a guy and he was sitting there and he thought, you know what? This rock is uncomfortable. That stump is uncomfortable. I should make a chair. And then he thought about it. And this idea of how to make the chair came from somewhere. It didn't exist in reality before he thought of it. And the same thing's true for everything else. We pull these ideas from somewhere. Even the dream state. And, I saw an idea recently that they were kind of saying that what AI is now doing for us is telling on us that we actually live in a simulation. So in other words, everything that AI can come up with is all a reflection of us and the simulation that we're living right now. So if you've ever watched one of those AI videos, you notice that it seems oddly familiar, how it morphs into different shapes and changes, and the scene changes, and it seamlessly goes like in the ethereal realm. It's like a dream. Like the AI is dreaming. We're programming its dream. The question is, who programs our dreams and our ideas, and where is that, I guess, other universe that is pure thought energy, the ether, as people call it?
That's a million years advanced technology that had set up this realm with that, like you say, simulation hologram. But again, that might be a little woo and offend some people. Because when you do leave this physical body, where do you go to? Well, you're not bound by this state of rules anymore. I love David Icke when he talks about, I know, again, controversial David Icke. But he's got some very, very incredibly valid points and just some things that are spot on trying to describe the controllers, the control system, and that whole thing after you leave the physical realm. You're not bound by this simulation anymore. You're outside the hologram at that point. But on the other side of that hologram, there's still another layer of, shall you say, simulation before you break out into something that we just more described there of the creation itself. There's another layer to re-loop you back into this simulation. So once you're naturally relieved out of this and your body retires from this simulation, you're in another one, but that's the one that recaptures you into this never-ending loop and throws you back into this simulation again until you break out of that one, and then you become into this more freer state. There many religions have talked about this. After death, there's a certain state. If you're not re-encapsulated into the reincarnation, sphere and circle in there, if you're able to walk outside that bound of the reincarnation, they describe it very clearly, exactly. You're into what would be considered more of the creation itself. But I mean, it doesn't matter if the Buddhists are talking about it or the Vedic texts talk about it, or you want to determine it in terms of technology that we understand in computer programs and holograms and thing. It's the same exact thing. And it's really interesting how many thousands of years ago they understood that beyond death, there's still an encapsulation in another set of hologram before you can escape out of that hologram too. So then you're looped in on a double loop here. And like, who set that up? That's the whole thing. That's millions of years of technology in front of us, like millions of years, if not a billion. Because I'll go back, and I think I've said this before, Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. But, if you follow traditional science, quote unquote, but they really just kind of lost the plot. But we'll go with the number that they've stated, 12.5 billion years for the mind exercise. So whenever the spark of creation came out in it, we turned into the third dimension was formed out of consciousness from the creation and creator itself. Whoosh. That was not a bang. That was a conscious, purposeful thought to create a new realm from something so vast that controls all realms. That in itself, at 12.5 billion years, just the way they trace gravity and where we're from the center point and how gravity was going up, but they find some stickiness now where it's starting to stick and then come back. So, and again, you're talking about infinite loops on that too, over 15 billion years on an outward trajectory, and then it swings and hits some sort of outer something like the bow shock or whatever, and then it comes back in. And I said, well, maybe that cycle has been repeated, and we only just found out the newest cycle of it as well. But just go with me on this, 12.5 billion years. So those planets out there with the intelligences and different species that are out there have if we're, well, let's say, I'll be generous and say 6 billion years. There's still something out in this third dimensional realm of time space that we understand, this construct of atoms and molecules and time linear, that has a 6 billion year head start on us. So think about the technology that could have been invented that's 6 billion, not millions, billions of years in front of us. Could they not develop a hologram? Could they not develop a technology that would be all enveloping, at least for the local? Do we even know that perhaps it's seated at our star here? They say the star has intelligence. If it does, that would feed into it's a hologram intelligence too, because the intelligence is inside the matrix, the frame. But I think I went too far with that. But anyway, the ether I was talking about was that 6 millivolt charge that's in our atmosphere that can be harvested for electroculture, that plants thrive off of that copper wire that comes down on whatever stick, pole, substrate. I wrapped my copper wire around my tomatoes, and man, they just went way over the top. Usually they would stop about the top of the cattle panel plus 2 lines. Usually we'll put another, about a foot apart, we'll put just some line around it, metallic wire. But this time it just went way over that, like feet over it, to where they just collapsed in on themselves. We had to have more netting and trellising going. So this year we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put it up on the barn, and we're going to put trellis netting so that can go all the way up like 12 feet. 12 feet tall tomato plants. I kid you not. These things were at least 10 before they collapsed. And if they would have been held up structurally, they easily could have reached 12 feet. That's my own usage of electroculture myself. Like, that's crazy. Never had tomatoes grow that big before ever. I just wrapped it twice instead of using the regular, like aluminum, say like 19 or 22 gauge that we would use, something like that for the wire. We did copper this time as well. Same, it was like 20 gauge, I think. But we had incredible results, incredible results. So that's the millivolt charge I was talking about in the ether that exists around us. Now that tapping into the ether, which you speak about, is something different than the ether. Well, I would guess they're one and the same. It's energy that's constantly around us that is the base for everything else to build off of. Now, how do you tap into that is the question. So I'll leave it there. Oh, wait, Ransom, one last, H. Johnson, double espresso, another great show, guys. Thank you. H. Johnson, keep bringing it to us here. Ransom, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I was trying to find this. I found a treasure trove of old stuff that kind of fits
Love
in
when that
this
happens.
discussion. So I don't know if I can get this to focus in here. Let's see here. Time. Is it a dimension of space? I don't know if you couldn't really see that. But this is a letter written for the Theosophical Society in 1920, where they were debating the idea of time being part of a dimension of its own in space. So, and then, of course, the same people are writing books like this, The Metaphysics of Raw Foods. This is also from 1920. It's someone reprinted it at home, but it gets into, I found this whole basic library of the Theosophical Society from this lady that was really looking into expanding her mind. So she had Islamic books, she had Christian books, she had, those self-help books, lots of that stuff. But in there were these things like this. I don't know if you can see that logo. I'll try to get a picture, but it's the third eye, the pineal and the pituitary bodies, written by T.P.C. Bernard. And this is also from 1920. And it's really cool when you look at the, it's like the Star of David kind of, but it's the alchemy, male and female. And I'm kind of blind here, but it says, there is no religion higher than truth. Just truth. I'll get you a copy of this.
Truth shall set you free.
Okay, yeah, there it is. But
third eye, yeah.
That little logo right there. This is really old stuff. It was like a little treasure trove of stuff, but it just shows you that people. And then here, let me skirt over to this article here, if I could do it right here tonight.
Third eye blind.
It's talking about the Pompeians, or however you say that, people of Pompeii. They were high. They were really, really high on all kinds of stuff. Mushrooms, other things. And
love them.
It's funny because they weren't the only ones, right? When you come over to the Mesoamerican cultures, they all were eating psychedelics, trying to get to that ether realm. Or, I know you're talking about the electronic thing, but generally when I think of the ether is that place of mental thought and idea, very possibly where real energy can transfer from that reality to our reality, and vice versa. So think about this. In human history, all about the same time throughout the Middle East, they went from this idea of multiple gods over to just one God. And whether you're a Christian and you believe of the Son of God, or you were more on the Egyptian school of thought where they moved over to only worshiping one solar God. But if you really get into the ideas of that time, they were talking about sun gazing kind of with their eyes shut, but basically they would face the sun, they would pray into the sun, and it sounds silly from our perspective until you consider the double slot idea. So, in other words, mind over matter. People that are observing things change the outcome or the behavior of that, all the way down to photons. And what is the sun? Basically, it's a big producer of photons. So, the light that's hitting you is 8 minutes. It left, the sun or whatever. But think about the idea of getting groups of people to focus ideas on the sun itself, being a big ball, producing all these photons. So we know with the double slot study that observing photons changes their pattern or where they're going or what they're doing. We don't know anything close to explaining that. There's another study that basically did stuff like this. It was like a consciousness study where they put a plant in a room and a rotating light, and that light would move around at random places. And they found the more rooms that they set up that when they put just a plant, the light would more often hit the life form in the room than any other place in the room. So it's like a light that's just moving around in the room. But when there's nothing in it, it's completely random. It's just completely random. But once you put a life form with the semi-consciousness in it, and not only that, a life form that needs photons to survive, all of a sudden the light started hitting that organism more often. So if you put all those ideas together, it basically says that if you can control the minds of man, you can control light itself, and therefore thought and creation, where the ether realm meets the physical realm we live in. I don't know. Was that too far to put out there? Basically, mind over matter is not, just some anecdotal thing. They've basically proven that we, as conscious individuals, can observe or think about something, which is another way of observing something. So, like, you imagine all those people that have stories of they were at home and then they just got a bad feeling and they had to check on a loved one, and that loved one just got in an accident or had some kind of problem. Now, some people would call that psychic, but at the same time, it's like mind over matter. They're thinking about something. It's interaction of energies over large spaces. And then add the idea of quantum entanglement. And this is my own idea. I didn't get this from somebody else. Whenever I thought about this quantum entanglement idea, and the idea that matter is not actually there, it's just more likely to be there than not to be there. So sometimes each little particle is not even there. It's somewhere. We don't know where, but most of the time it's there. So it's more likely to be there than not to be there. But that kind of puts out the idea that the entire universe that we perceive is actually only one particle that's endlessly moving position and creates all things that we interact with. Just one single particle. And then you get into the ideas of the singularity that we kind of credit for exploding and the Big Bang. And we've kind of found out that that's only maybe partially true, because we found a solar system, a star, another little miniature galaxy that's older than the Big Bang. So it's very possible that these Big Bangs are something that happen constantly, and it's not just one universe, but infinite number of universes. And then the other scary thing, whenever they look out as far as they can into the universe, what they see is something with the same properties of an event horizon on what they're calling a black hole. So it's very possible we actually live inside of that. And there's a lot of papers done that kind of crosses over to this living in a simulation idea, but they don't call it a simulation. It's more like we're a projection, right? So we're right there at that event horizon, but whatever we are or whoever we are isn't actually here. This is just the projection screen that you're seeing. And, that you can circle mind bend yourself back into that mind over matter and affecting the photons. But in a sense, it seems like somebody just thought us up and they're still thinking about us right now, whoever they is. It might be us. All of us may be the same person at different points of thought. And that really, blow your mind there.
The gravitational monsters are out. Imagine if each black hole had its own consciousness that was the actual entity. And that all-powerful thing's getting sucked in there, and then it could be the projection from that field that could be projected back out. Once it's eaten and it is in collapse form, perhaps it's captured, cataloged, stored, and then reprojected out, because that would be happening at the speed of light getting sucked in, but then that reprojection out. So I don't know. Many ways to take that. We need a handful of mushrooms to talk about this more, just like the Hittites. I forgot the Hittites, Jordan area where Petra is, the Hittites down that way. They used to control all the trade routes there. They still find vases, and they had in the past, packed full of magic mushrooms with honey. So the honey solidified, and then they kept the magic mushrooms intact 5,000 years, and they say they're still good. Now, I don't know if I'd eat a 5,000-year-old magi in the honey, but I guess if you took that out and boiled it in green tea, that might work, huh? Consciousness does not need to be confined to the brain, although it could. So imagine if you're doing the double slit experiment with your eyes closed, holding a kilogram of silver in each hand. Would that not help the electronic or electrical properties of your thought on that experiment as well? or a single ounce of gold in each hand while you did that double slit experiment in the morning. Like have actual base metals, could be copper, larger quantities, could be silver, 2 kilogram bars, one in each hand, could be gold, whatever. But I'm wondering about that combination of vibration, your chanting, your literal utterance of a frequency, holding base metals, precious metals in the hand for the electrical current, and at the same time with the double slit experiment in on a bright sunny morning, combining all three of those in for your manifestation for the day.
That's funny. I found that article. You said black holes might be conscious. Suns might be conscious.
We're projecting kilograms of gold back to ourselves tomorrow. Thanks very much. See you next week. Remember,